And you are welcome along to a Wednesday edition of the Huddle Breakdown with the two amigos here today. Our recording schedule about as reliable and predictable as the center back pairing for Celtic this season. Joined by my good friend Alan Morrison. James here on hosting duty today. How you doing this afternoon, Alan? For you, you're it's like a time machine. You're only 4 hours ahead of me this week. It's crazy.
Yeah,
We were just talking about it before we went live. This daylight savings nonsense. So how you getting on?
yeah. Good, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are listening and consuming your premium Celtic content.
Yes, and premium priced. You get what you pay
Yes,
for, as they
absolutely.
say.
You do indeed.
So we're here today to review the uh, blazing display of high quality football from the weekend in the Livingston 2, Celtic 4. I guess I said that backwards. Celtic 4, Livingston 2 result in the cup game. So let's just start. I'm sure you've probably reviewed it already, Alan. Um, did you have to pin your eyelids open, or did you have to
Well,
self medicate while doing it, or how did you
oh,
get through that?
yeah, that's another story, obviously. But no, listen. So not attempting to be contrarian for the sake of it, but it is a feature of doing data analysis of these games that whereas supporter reaction is usually sort of bipolar, it's either brilliant or it's awful. I tend to usually be more in a much larger grey area in the middle as regards most performances. And when you look at this game, and again, just look at some of the basics. I mean, we were just short of 5 xg, right? And they generated just over a half xg. So I mean, we've talked previously about Champions League games and at the elite level at the Champions League. If you let one of the elite teams get to 3, 4, 5 xg, you're probably looking at a 7, 8 niller, right? And in the context of the gap between Celtic and a Livingston, that would be equivalent to, a Manchester City or a PSG and a team, a pot four team, right, in the Champions League, at least. So in that respect, in terms of performance indicators, you would say, 30 shots on goal, 25 chances created, over 500 team packing score, 57 touches in the box, over 600 completed passes, all of those things. No saves. Joe Hart didn't have to make a save outside the goals. Um, all of those things, you'd think, okay, that was pretty decent. But of course, it wasn't in the sense of, it was 2-2 for longer than we cared to bear. And honestly, I was in my head. I was watching the game in real time. I was actually thinking of you, sadly, because I was thinking of what are the odds at this point. Is it 60-40, 70-30? I settled on
Yeah.
70-30 with about 15 minutes to go. I think this is 70-30. And I'm not sure I'm really happy about it because that 30, as they brought on yet another basketball player, I was sort of thinking all it's going to take is one throw, one corner, and we're toast here, and there will be no coming back. So the context of the game and the way it panned out wasn't good, and it was more nervous than it absolutely should have been. But if you just look at the raw stats and that's all you looked at, you'd think, wow, that is one dominant performance. So and that's why you have to take into context the actual, obviously the actual game. It's why we watch it with our eyes as well, and don't just rely on the stats. But maybe we were losing our shit a little bit too much. I don't know. What do you think? Am I being too sort of?
No, I agree with you 100% because that's this I think from what I've been reading and hearing and some of the other podcasts I listen to, that's kind of why I set you up with that phrasing or framing of the question, is because I agree. I mean, we're in classic confirmation bias uh, uh, sequencing of the season now, where we're all kind of anchored of the issues of this team. And I think generally speaking, the mood is tilted negative. So we're all kind of, as we're watching these games, it's like in
We're
a
looking for
visceral.
issues. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
looking
we're
for
just
issues. Yeah.
constantly going, when's this going to implode? And every single time that something doesn't work out, or every missed pass, or you know, um, so yeah, I agree with you. Like, it was. it was, through the analytical lens, they had two great finishes, which, this is a dreadful Livingston side.
Mm,
I went back and looked in preparation for us recording today, and so they're down. In that, as I love how you phrase it, they're in the corner of sadness since 1819 season, when
mhm,
kind of the stats bomb data begins, where they're amongst the worst of the worst teams as far as creating chances from open play, and that's populated by those horrible Hamilton teams that were like cockroaches that wouldn't get relegated.
mm.
And once they finally did, I think they're down in League One now.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
they are.
and then that
And they're
awful,
gonna finish behind the Bairns. The
right,
mighty.
right. Your true team, and then
Talking about a real team.
also also one of the worst teams in recent history, which they um, avoided relegation, was the post double St Johnstone team when they lost Kerr and their other good player. I forget the other guy they sold the summer preceding that team, and
Mm,
they've had the worst performance from open play. I think their average from open play in XG that season was 0.39.
mm,
And the only reason, there was some negative variance for them, but the other the other reason that they weren't 12th in the table was Dundee was an absolute, defensive um, sieve. So they they gave up a good number of more goals than St. Johnston did, or at least chances, in that season. So um, this is a dreadful Livingston team, and they're, as we talked about, kind of heading into the game, they're underperforming a bit.
mm,
But yeah, so the it was that expectation. I think generally, like, people went in with this framing, and like, we should be blowing these guys out 6-0. And generally speaking, despite all of our issues in defense, and some of the issues in transition, and how the midfield's playing with this mix, and all of these issues above and beyond that, it still was kind of a 6-0 game,
mm,
um, in kind of the flow of how things went. And we didn't take all our chances, or chances at a level that we could have. And they happen to have two, brilliant finishes, which, again, for them this season, that's like a purple unicorn.
mm,
They just haven't been doing that, so it just happened to occur against us.
mm.
And thank goodness it happened in a game when we were, first of all, a cup game, but also a game when um, we were, just creating scores and scores of chances.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. I think when I reflect back on the watching experience, a lot of it was I was sat there expecting to see problems in certain parts of the pitch. So I was waiting for the wingers to screw up. I was waiting to get onto Liam Scales' back for just being that fraction of a second too slow, or not jumping again, not being able to get his body off the ground. And actually, as far as Scales is concerned, these things did happen. But let's point out the bright spot, which I think is the wing play from both players. We've struggled this season to get one out of two wingers to perform on the day. So to get both, again, caveat it with it was mainly the first half. It kind of tailed off in the second half. But actually, if you look at it, so I do like an uh, aggregated metric called Celtic attacking threat score. It adds up. It's a count, really. It's a very simple count of how many shots you had, how many chances you created, how many touches you had in the box. It's just you add it all together, and that gives you your overall attacking threat score. It's very simple, but in this game, both Kuhn and Maeda had attacking threat scores of 17, which anything. I mean, somebody like Edouard at his best would have been averaging probably a touch under 11, maybe 10. He might be breaking double figures as an average. So 17's really good. They both, Maeda had 2.2 expected scoring contribution, Kuhn just over 1. Apart from Alistair Johnston, who I want to come to later, they were both like 100, on exactly the same packing score, 177, which is very good, very high. Both between them, they had 22 touches in the box of the ball, which is great. It's what you want your wingers to do when they're on the wrong side with the balls on the other side, etc. So all in all, right, and in terms of chances created, I think Kuhn actually created 6 chances on the day. Maeda only one. We know that's not his strength, but Kuhn, they weren't great chances that he created, Kuhn, but 6 chances in the game is incredible. So let's let's celebrate the wing play because it's something that we've majored on all season and worried about. And Kuhn, who has looked frankly a little bit timid, dare I say, a bit scared in the games previously, and the point was made pre-game about his physical recovery from a bad wisdom tooth extraction post, losing weight and all that sort of thing. And again, young man coming to a new club, new city, new country, we can tend to get on these people's back, especially as you say, because of the negative biases that we're all feeling around that position. And so I think he pretty much arrived. But in terms of that, was a really terrific performance, actually. So but of course, the absolute challenge for him is that he's got to trying to hit that mark or near it at least most weeks, right? And that's the challenge for him to do that. And to see Maeda back to his best, where he's taking the ball and just driving it the full back. Now, albeit he was up against a 6'6" basketball player who couldn't run much, So, but he did it. He got past the guy before he ballooned it into the stands. But he got his goals, and I think I love Maeda. I love Maeda between the posts. I know they weren't the cleanest of finishes, but I think he can do a lot of damage when he gets in those positions. So let's celebrate the wing play, is what I'll say in terms of that one. We can maybe get onto some of the negatives if you want, but I'm going to try and reverse some of the confirmation bias, which I'm partly to blame for seeding because the wing play's been atrocious, by at least celebrating that aspect of the game.
Yeah, I think Kuhn's been a victim of the climate in which he's arrived, meaning that he hasn't been great so far, but I wouldn't say he's been any as bad as kind of the prevailing narrative on him. And I kind of viewed him as a an okay signing when we signed him, meaning that when I looked at his history, he seemed what I use a baseball reference. He's like a replacement level Celtic winger in my mind, meaning that he's a guy who's going to come into Celtic and perform kind of in line with how most of our wingers historically have performed, which domestically that's good enough. Like that's going to be enough to get the job done.
And James, we should all realize as well that those of us that are used to your sort of fact based miserablism, that's actually quite a compliment.
Well, exactly, exactly. And coming out of last summer, that was my critique again within this framework is that we were signing a lot of guys that were below replacement level, meaning that we brought in guys like Quan and some of these other guys that were like they're not even up to a level that like could have been a backup on the 18-19 team, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like that, and that's so. I think he's going to be fine. He's not as quixotic as Palma, and I would view as almost like a selfish player. That's how I view Palma. Like he's as we talked about. I call him a compiler. So I think he's going to be fine. Like he's got some issues. He's not the most physical guy. He's not going to be a guy who wins a lot of tackles, defending, and that kind of thing. But he's fast. He's athletic. He's going to do some good stuff. And I think the fact that there was a health issue, um, and with transitioning, so I don't worry about him. I don't think he's going to be like a game changer in Europe or anything like that. But I think he'll be fine. And again, for the price level and his age that we bought him at, it's not the aspirational signing I was hoping for, but I also think that people have kind of gotten way over their skis as to how bad he's going to be supposedly. So I think we'll see more of what we saw on the weekend coming out of him. But the other thing, I got a comment on my buddy Martindale. So and I'm curious about your feedback on this or how you viewed it watching it a second time is we joked about how he went flat back six in the last game to try and kind of take away our wing play, which was funny because we haven't had any wing play normally. This time it seemed like he lined up like a 4-2-3-1 maybe,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yes, and man
What do you
marking,
want?
so it
Yeah,
was like
yeah. Man to
it
man in
was
midfield. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So he pulled a Derek McInnes at Celtic Park with Livingston's talent level, and I mean, if anything, um, we've talked about how when we have had this kind of performance where we've been dominant relative to chance creation, and
Mhm.
with the caveat, there's issues. Like we're not saying there aren't issues, or that this was some brilliant performance on the weekend, but it's been when the opposition has really set up in a naively stupid way.
mm,
And whether it was the Aberdeen performance when we beat them 6-0 and they basically sat back and didn't do anything, like there was no
mm,
intensity they're defending.
mm,
Since then, like we've had some of these other performances where the opposition have just been like, "What the hell are you doing?"
mm,
I categorize how Livingston set up as like, "What the hell were you doing?" what,
mm.
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of worked to a little extent. I mean, we know that Bernardo, if you put Bernardo under pressure, he's just going to pass the ball backwards, right? So in that sense, it's probably wise to man mark him because essentially you're just forcing him to kind of recycle the ball. He's not going to, you're not going to get a lot of positive variance out of that. And O'Reilly, to me, to my again, and you'll probably blanch at the non-analyticalness of this, but
Not at
he
all,
he he
Alan.
he
Not at all.
he, he looked like a tired player.
Yeah, he looks tired. Yeah.
He looked fatigued. He looked like he didn't have energy about his play. Having said that, he created 7 chances. That's a poor Matt O'Reilly performance. Just the 7 chances created. Now some of them were from set plays, obviously from corners and so forth. But still, and again, we come back to this notion that last season, when O'Reilly, as all players do, had a quiet or maybe a less effective game, you kind of didn't notice until you tallied it all up at the end. But now you do because who else is going to do it? That's the problem we've got, especially if Bernardo's being man marked, and we know that Bernardo's not the most aggressive passer of the ball anyway. So I actually thought it was reasonably effective. Maybe not because of maybe it wasn't by design. Maybe they didn't anticipate that O'Reilly, who's now played, O'Reilly's now that's now 22 matches in a row. O'Reilly's played the full 90 minutes, right? So I think it's it's not surprising
What
that he's perhaps
what one
showing.
wonders why we have a rash of injuries.
Yeah. So and it was probably a wise move in terms of on Bernardo, but they couldn't stop the ball going to the wide players. And actually, I think that's where the centre backs, to be fair to them, did a decent job as they got the ball to the wide players, especially in that first half, time and time again. And then there was a lot of havoc to be had there. So I didn't think it was awful what Livingston were trying to do, and I think in the context of the central midfield, it kind of worked. But they left gaps in other places, I think, which meant we had fun out wide, which is what he tried to avoid the first the first time.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of my view is
Playing,
that
playing, and playing Nottingham as a right back. I mean, that I just don't that bit that I don't get. I don't get that bit at all. I mean, they just if
yeah,
it was just to shoehorn another big lad into the team, maybe that
right.
was the reason. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean I agree with you like in isolation about the midfield, but I mean I don't think there's really a scenario where if they didn't man mark in the midfield, other than maybe O'Reilly, if they just kind of sat back narrow and more zonal and defended space as opposed to going man. I mean, Awata and Bernardo let them have the ball. I mean, you know what I mean? Like
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
them
yeah.
them man marking was dragging people out of position, and the space open was just
Well,
unbelievable.
I mean, they've got they've got players like if they had Holt and Shinnie and Pittman, I think if they had those types of players in the midfield, you could see that almost working. But they didn't.
Right.
They had young kid Bradley, who's no physicality at all. They had Stephen Kelly, no physicality at all. They had and the lad Mackay. So they just didn't have the players to do it. I think that was the
Yeah.
that I would say. Yeah, they didn't have the players to do it effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was kind of my view is that again we've had another opponent that relatively speaking, and this is my concern that we'll get into as we look forward to St Johnstone is I don't see Craig Levine with his history setting up in a similar way. I think we kind of know what we're going to get from him, which is the worrying part to me. On the margin, again, it's all within the
Mm,
margin. Um, so what? As far well, let's talk about that midfield because that was you know I agree with you. I mean, for the most part, I think the midfield was almost like a draw between the two teams, which is kind of you know again grading on a scale or on a curve. But also probably not that surprising I mean, the Iwata Bernardo combo is not going to out dynamic too many sides, even domestically. But again, you watched the game a second time. So what are your thoughts on how those two play and how this three kind of worked in midfield?
Yeah, well, as I say, it kind of you keep coming back to if O'Reilly's not at his best, then it starts to stand out. And as I say, last season there were sufficient other talents that didn't matter so much, and now it does because the thing with Bernardo is, and again, what you want from a to me, what you want from a Portuguese Benfica product under 21 international playing in Scotland is you expect them to kind of stand out and dominate games, and he seems to struggle to impose himself on games. What do I mean by that? I'm just simply just get he doesn't get on the ball enough, and when he does get on the ball enough, he's too safe in possession, and I just and I can't see that changing. That just seems to be the way he plays. It's certainly not worth for me. You for 6 million or whatever it is the agreed fee, you need a lot more than that creatively. From a creative perspective, are you going to play as a Celtic kind of box to box number eight? It's just insufficient. I mean, he had like how many pack passes? I think it was something like four or three. No, five. Sorry, five. He had five, which actually was two more than O'Reilly, which is that's where O'Reilly was really lacking in that game. Iwata actually had 14 pack passes. He kind of, to me, kind of grew into the game. Four secondary assisting passes, Iwata, plus an assist. So actually, Iwata showed some hitherto not obvious attacking intent signs in that game, which were nice to see. I still think he has little mad moments where he's out of position, and he's at his worst when he loses the ball because then he just charges around like a bull to try and get it back. So there's some real rough edges there because I think he's a really composed player when he's in control, but when he's not in control, he completely loses all control and he flies around, and that's a bit of a worry. And as a three, we've not seen that three. I don't think we've seen that three before, so that was new. So and man marking adds a different dynamic to it. So yeah, I'm not going to make a absolute judgment on that. I think it wasn't perfect. If O'Reilly's playing well, I think the whole team changes. To be honest with you, and looks better. So that would have a bearing on it. So no, I think both of them had their moments. More so Iwata, as I say, and especially in the attacking sense, he was surprisingly effective in the final third, which is unlike him. Um, he doesn't get packed a lot, so but when he meaning he only get packed four times, which is actually less than the fullbacks. Meaning he's very disciplined, and you don't. And McGregor would be double that at least because McGregor tends to wander to try and create danger. So we do have that discipline, albeit we conceded two goals, but not not 0.6 xG against. I would still, on the whole, I would still take that because our xG against is going down. By the way, I think that's only fair to say,
Mhm.
despite the obvious deficiencies at centre back.
Yeah, it's I think some of that has to be caveated with how dreadful they've been from open play. So
Mm. Yeah.
um, that them creating kind of their average against us from open play is you know again on a curve is not great. But yeah, I generally agree with you. I think that the issue with Awada, and this is why I kind of don't like this mix with him and Bernardo is he's just not dynamic enough on the ball, and
Mm.
um, combined with the center back pairing, it's these. As I keep borrowing your sayings, it's the toxic combinations of mixing him with those two center backs, and I think that's why Carter Vickers, a fit Carter Vickers, could be so meaningful with Awada if that's kind of the pairing that we end up um, if McGregor's injury is longer term here. Um, so it's how Awada fits with those two center backs, and then with almost a complete dearth of any creativity coming out of that left side. I mean, from the midfield to your point on Bernardo. So it's you know we'll probably get to the point of speculating on over the international break on potential Hatate return and what that might mean. But that's an example where we're just game to game. Bernardo's almost a zero in that regard. And there's like you said, he had that nice pass. I forget which team against. inside the box. But kind of connecting the center backs into the final third. It's where I don't. He almost does nothing. I mean,
Yeah.
other than recycle.
Hmm.
He's not
Hmm.
picking up the ball and carrying it, or
Hmm.
making any kind of great pack passes to take out defenders with any
Yeah.
kind of
That's right. I
reliability.
mean, it's like
So
even people talk when they sort of and it's now become reminiscing. When people reminisce about Hattati in their minds, they're thinking about great through balls and great passes, but actually, Hattati's most consistent attribute that he brings to the team is he just carries the ball forward.
yeah,
And he's actually probably the best midfielder we've had, just for that simply getting the ball further than 10 yards in the opposition half. And that might sound like a simple thing, but
no,
it is something that we track and not, and like Bernard, as James has said, Bernardo doesn't do it, right? And when he doesn't do it, it just means you're lacking that little bit of progression. Because if you just progress the ball at reasonable speed, 10 yards inside the opposition half, you're forcing the opposition to make a decision about who goes to close down, do they leave their shape and all that, and then and then somebody else presumably that has then got a bit of freedom. So Hatati's ability just to simply drive forward into space on occasion, I would say, is more missed than the occasional glorious through ball that we get.
100% agree. And again, within the context of this midfield three in particular, that's not O'Reilly's game really either. That's not his
No.
relative strength. He's probably actually a little bit below. Um, it's probably a weakness on a relative basis for him, and I don't think that's really Awada's strength either. Like he's not. We're not going to get the kind of charging runs that are less frequent but still there with McGregor,
Mm,
where there's a seam and he just blows past the
mm,
presser, and all of a sudden within 2 seconds you're 20 yards up the pitch, and now all of a sudden the defense is in transition. It's a little more chaotic, like that. It's just getting very difficult. Uh, to catch this again back to my criticism on how Livingston set up is that with that kind of situation, um, a team like Craig Levine St Johnston's likely to be more narrow, more zonal. Yeah, who's going to be creating the angles and the movement and getting uh,
mm.
a bunkered defense disorganized a little bit or in transition with a little bit of chaos? And that's where again, even with how deficient we are in midfield, um, the way they were set up on the weekend, it kind of made it easier. To your point, I mean, the wings were it was a free for all. I mean, it was.
Yeah.
I mean, it was.
Well, that's so, and we did get the wingers running and creating space and creating havoc in the wide areas, and that kind of compensated a little bit. But going forward, that is a real deficit with those three players. And who is going to actually create space simply by ball carrying? I mean, it's not ball carrying is it's not like passing in terms of it's a relatively low volume activity. But as you say, when McGregor does it well, and he suddenly goes past two or three, which he can do. It can really, really, really disrupt the defense.
Yeah, and I guess that's the one thing where the nature of Awada, it does. I mean, again, this goes back to confirmation bias. Every time Scales or Welsh goes on a rampaging run, it's you're just waiting for it to go horribly wrong. At least I am. But that is the benefit of Awada being there, which is he just kind of slides in, and he's more likely to be central and in a position to do that. Whereas if McGregor's all over the place, which he probably should be. And again, I'm not.
Mm,
That's not me being critical of how he plays or how he's being used. But if you're going to use the center backs in that way, you've got a natural player to kind of swap in and cover, replace that player making the run. The question is, what's the marginal upside of a Scales or Welsh doing it? And again, this is where I think on the weekend they were able to do that and then get the ball wide, and then because of the matchups and the way Livingston were playing, that was actually creating some problems for Livingston. My fear is on the weekend coming up that Scales makes a run and runs into three guys, and even if he passes it out wide, there's to do what? Like, yeah, they can maybe cross the ball aerially, but into three center backs or
yeah,
five guys right there,
it's
as
it's
opposed to more
it's some,
chaos like we saw.
Yeah, sometimes it's actually a game where you've got a lot of the ball, you've got so much possession, and it's in those games that players' weaknesses become apparent. Because I, 'cause
Right.
I do think if we had a game away in Europe to a really tough team and we were defending the 18-yard box, I think you'd see the best of Liam Scales. I really do. I think that
Yep.
suits his game, defending his box, heading crosses away, being big, being strong. Not you, thou shalt not pass. Simple game in a sense. I think he probably is very good at that sort of traditional centre half play, but ask him to dictate the tempo of play, ask him to make timely runs that aren't simply just moving the ball and then running into trouble, which he did time and time. I mean, I think 4 times he actually turned the ball over in bad areas at the weekend. Um, these things all become and just that fraction of a second longer that he takes to move the ball than anybody else, it just becomes exacerbated when you're up against a team that you're dominating and it's 2-2 and everyone's getting a bit tense. It just heightens it. Some of it's confirmation bias, but some of it is because it's what's happening in front of your eyes, right?
Oh,
And then
%.
and then you come to just the fact that he's 6'3", and he's just losing aerial ball after aerial ball because he can't jump. He can't jump. He's actually small. The more he tries to jump, the smaller he gets in relative terms to the opponent. He was 11 wins, 7 losses in aerial challenges, but and this is something I'm going to look at, which is sort of clean aerial wins. I think it was like 7 out of 18, as in he won the header and Celtic kept possession of the ball. Because the problem with Scales is even if he does win the header, it's often such untidy ball that
You're
either it just ricochets to some random, or it goes out for a corner, or it goes out for a throw, and then against a team like Livingston, that's exactly what they're looking for that second phase. It's just untidy. It's not clean. It's not dominant. Is what I'm trying to say, right? And that is very
well,
much was highlighted.
I think, so that opens up I think an interesting, we won't get into it too much here, but it opens up a key distinction between data and analysis because so if you just look at raw aerial dual stats, which that's like generation 1.0 of data that InStat and YSCAT have been recording for almost 10 years now. I can't believe it. um, and then StatsBomb just came out with kind of a next generation version of that that uses an ELO model, which is okay. Every duel's not the same. I've mentioned it on here before, but it depends on the opposition. So if you beat if you win a header or against Greg Taylor, it's not the same as against Carter Vickers, and there's a scoring. Like in chess, relative
Mhm,
strength of your opponent in the aerial duel. And actually, if you look at that, so on a raw basis, Scales is kind of middle of the pack. If you look at
mhm,
him on like an ELO strength of opposition basis, I think he's fourth in the league. Like so, he
yeah,
he actually wins. I'm putting that in air quotes. Wins the header in the sense that he's the one that heads the ball over the person that he's battling against, um, which suggests, oh well, he's actually a good defender. But this goes back to your next step, which is okay, like how cleanly is he winning these? And that's how a lot of the stuff's on fine margins because, um, and this goes back. I suffered the same disease as poor Liam, um, white man's disease, and joking growing up. Whether it's Woody Harrelson and White Man Can't Jump. I played basketball up through high school, and couldn't jump over. As we joke, you can't jump over a telephone book. Right. And I actually had a guy dunk on me once and I was eating his crotch. That's how high he jumped and dunked over me in a summer league game one year. So I can relate to this problem. And you know that extra 2, 3, 4 inches on your vertical that you're not getting is that margin between. He might be doing a lot right positionally in the box. To your point, like he's really good inside the box when he's positioning, but he just can't elevate to the point where even with his height, where he's
I mean, you mentioned
dominant.
Taylor. Taylor can spring. He's only a
Right.
small guy, but he can spring, and he
He's
wins
got some
more than his
hops.
fair
Yep.
share. Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
As I say, scales get smaller the more he tries to jump.
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
I
So
brings
yeah,
back
so all that.
nightmares.
So I thought, I mean, I kind of, I think that Elo thing is great. I love the concept of that, of essentially pairing off, because an aerial duel is a duel, so it's a 1v1. So if you have each person having a sort of relative, kind of, stat attack card or whatever it is, and like, what's your jumping score? Ah, mine's the trumps, like playing top trumps, isn't it? I
Right.
like that. It's simple, but it's meaningful. But what I do is slightly different. Is that for every duel, and by duel I mean it's either a ground duel, so I call that a tackle, or it's an aerial duel, which I call an aerial duel. There's four things that can happen. You either win the duel and the ball then goes to your team, so that's a win-win. You win the duel, but the ball goes to the opposition or it goes out of play. Essentially, it's turned over. You lose the duel, but the ball still goes to one of your own players, or you lose the duel and the ball goes to the opposition. So it's all everything falls into one of those four categories, and both scales. What I'm going to look at is well, let's call them dominant wins. You've won the duel and the ball, and you maintain possession. Because I'm going to look at that next week or this week maybe in terms of, because I've got this is centre back data I can go back a long number of years on and
Yep.
just compare, because I don't think even if he is, like to your point, even if he is winning the ball, it's rarely clean and it's rarely in a dominant way. Like Carter Vickers, he's not a big guy particularly, and he just maneuvers the opponent in such a way that he can win clean possession, and he does it through what I'd call physical intelligence. He knows where to put his body. Whereas when I look at Scales, I look at somebody he's awkward. The way he runs is awkward. He doesn't seem to have that physical intelligence of where to position his body. What's the optimal? Where should I be? When should I? When at what precise second should I bump the player such that I then take a step
Right.
back and I've cleanly won the ball? He doesn't possess that ability, which,
The
and it's
dark
an ability.
arts.
It's cartoon. No, it's an ability though. It's a
Yep.
decision. It's a physical act. So you've
Yep.
made a decision. It's about timing, and it's about having the strength and the positional ability and the brain power to then perform that act in such a way that you win clean possession. Carter Vickers has got it. He doesn't. Right. I can't put it any other way. Now, in terms of how does that come out in the data, I think it's hidden in some of
Hmm.
these win loss win win type metrics. But I suspect, well, the sounds of it, the StatsBomb Elo thing is probably not quite doing it yet. But I would hope that they would get there.
No, and I think the other aspect of this is that that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's good in the air. And a classic
Mm,
example of that, I think, in recent history is Ayer. I mean,
mm,
Ayer could actually
yes,
defend okay in certain ways aerially, but on attacking headers, he was useless. And a
yeah,
lot of times that's not even a duel. So if you're
mm,
if you're Kyogo, who because of movement you're able to split defenders and get a free header, that's not actually an aerial duel. So that doesn't get
mm, mm.
classified as he
No, no,
beat
I wouldn't
someone.
classify it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right, right. So that's not, so that doesn't mean he's bad in the air or good in the air. It means that damn, this guy can get into space and finish on a cross aerially. So that's a whole separate aspect of all of this, to break out from a skill set perspective to analyze. But well, any other final thoughts then? Any others? Well, you wanted to get back to Alistair Johnston, so let's
Did
touch upon.
yes. I just again, he's. I mean, maybe you might call him a compiler, but I'll pick out three data points from the last four games, i.e., the four games since he recovered from his facial injury, right? His packing score, his average packing score, total packing score, that's taking into account passes, receptions, turnovers, recoveries, and running with the ball past the points. Adding all those things together, you sort of net packing score. His average up until he was injured was 93 per game, which is good. His average in the last four games is 177, which is almost double. He's twice had an over 200 packing score game. So 200 packing score is a bit like scoring 50 points at basketball, right? It happens. It's not irregular, but it's something you'd say, or taking 5 wickets at cricket for those many Celtic fans that I know love cricket. It's noteworthy. It's something to be celebrated. He's passed 200 packing score in a single game twice in the last 4 games. His expected scoring contribution, again, up to the injury was 0.28, so that's expected goals plus expected assists. 0.28, decent for a fullback. In the last 4 games, it's been 0.66, so almost more than doubled, actually. And then it's simply just his possessions in the box. Again, before injury, it was 1.5. Last 4 games, it's been 3, so it's doubled. So, whether this is a burst of form or what you want to call it, but, long may that continue, because that's from the sort of, let's call it the go-to starters that Celtic have got, and we don't have enough of them at the moment. We're going to need the O'Reillys, the Johnstons and the Harts and the Carter Vickers to be at that level for the run-in, to compensate for the fact that the Yangs and the Coons and the Palmas and the Bernardos are going to be a bit like this. So yeah, I just wanted I think that's a good news story in that sense.
Yeah, I think to me, Johnston is a good example of a good player, a useful player who's not getting optimized. So I think you know, domestically, obviously, he's fine as a right back playing at Celtic, but I think, kind of like what we talked about with Welsh in the past, I think Awada probably fits this criteria as well, which is I think a right-sided center back and a back three is kind of how he's built to be, uh, the most useful on a team. Um, and because a lot of those attributes that you're talking about consistently he's good at. He doesn't have the blazing speed. He's got decent speed. He's got a good speed for a right center back. Does he have the level of speed as an attacking fullback for Celtic, where he's gonna at a European level or um, even against a higher quality athletic fullback in Scotland? Is he going to blow past them regularly, get to the byline, and whip those crosses? Probably not. Not consistently, and that's where I think he's he's got a lot of value that could be utilized in a different way. But I agree with you, like it. He's obviously going to have the ebbs and flows with performances like everybody else, and it would be huge if he goes through a period here where he's kind of on the ball, uh, gets hot, so to speak. He gets, he's playing chess instead of checkers for some reason, and we go through that. Like athletes go through that. You go through these periods of, and again, to use a baseball analogy, this is why batters go into slumps. All of a sudden, what looked like a cantaloupe coming in, and you could see it, and everything's kind of working in slow
Mm,
motion.
mm,
Call it being in the zone
mm,
across sports. Uh, all of a sudden you can't see shit. Like
mm,
it could be a pitcher hangs a curveball that's just kind of fluttering in there,
mm, mm,
and you don't see it, and you just swing right through it. Whereas,
mm,
if you're in the zone, that's something you hit 450 feet, so hopefully. To your point, we're getting some of these guys that are getting into these areas where they're more in the zone and able to see steps in slow motion.
mm,
um, but that's again, I think you know, um, caution prevails because we've had these false dawns, and um, given the relative matchup against Livy, I think I'm I'm trying to remain cautiously optimistic. But that's I think we'll segue here as we look towards the weekend with St Johnstone, um, because I think they're going to present a different challenge than Livingston. Um, so to his credit, one of the big issues that they were having is that they were conceding, pretty much the highest amount of XG in the league prior to Levine's arrival, and he's chopped that down. Like they're much more organized. They're still not creating much. They're probably around the same as far as chance creation. And I'm not implying that they're a good team. They're performing at a level that still puts them about where they should be in the table. Um, but on a single day, if a team's well organized and gets a decent performance from their keeper, and or our finishing isn't great, which hasn't been a lot of the season. Um, they're probably they're defending in that zone of teams that are under Levine that are better teams, like a Hibs or a Hearts or an Aberdeen. Like that's kind of where he's got them defending at. And that also speaks to how much those other teams are underperforming, by the way. But so as we look towards this game, that's kind of where I do get anxiety. Is that we're probably going to face a team that's better organized, um, more disciplined, and with a I would I fear a more difficult philosophy for us given our relative weaknesses. So, how much do you love Craig Levine and watching St Johnstone?
Oh God. So I mean, yeah, the date. Listen, the data I've got is kind of it's aggregated, so it's post. I don't have pre Levine coming in and post Levine coming in, right? So and this is a team that's won what, two of the last 12 games, 1-0 at Ross County and 2-0 at Aberdeen, which is not as great as it sounds, to be honest. So if you look at, I think if you look at their stats for the season, you would say that they're probably just slightly better than Livingston, but not a lot in terms of attacking capability. Ross County, and they're probably just not, and Ross County are probably just worse than them defensively. And again, St Johnstone are probably on a par with Livingston. I think the second highest in terms of XG against. I think the second most goalkeeper saves that the goalkeeper has to make by any team. So their goalkeeper on average has to make 3.59 saves a game. There's only Ross County, which is over four, has a higher value. They tend to have very low average xG per shot for, and pretty high xG against shots on their goal. They've got the second worst xG difference in the league and the second worst post shot xG difference in the league. They've got the lowest expected goals for in the league, so their attack is just really really bad. So listen, that so really, I don't. I agree that the their game plan will be more simple and coherent and defensive than Livingston's, who still, I think Martindale was wanting to get as far up off the pitch where he could get as many basketball players into Celtic's goalmouth as he possibly could, and therefore, it wasn't an all out defensive, um, performance from Livingston. And I think this will be. So but in terms of it's just sheer ability based on performance, I don't think they're any better a football team than Livingston. To be honest with you, and in terms of capability, in terms of personnel, I mean they're still relying on Nicky Clark in terms of he's come back in the last few games as one of their strikers. They've still got the likes of Liam Gordon, McGowan in defence. It's still sort of same old in that respect. Considine still
Yep.
playing unbelievably. The lad. They've got a bit of physicality and presence in midfield. I think the lad Phillips, who gets booked most games, he's. I think he looks like he's got something about him. But they really struggle to create. They really do. I mean, there's in fact, I think probably they have less goals in their games than any other team in the league. So it's going to be dour. They got a 0-0 before. And if we all remember that one, because it was, we remember that one for Liam Scales, who had had too much of the ball, that he exposed himself a little bit. He was
Yep.
just on the ball too much. So here's a question for you. So just a little bit of chatter I'm getting is that Carter Vickers is fit and may well play at the weekend. So
Oh,
who
good.
partners, Welsh or Scales?
I mean, yeah. I
Shall I
mean,
chop off your right hand or your left hand?
yeah. So I guess that comes down to preference versus. I think Rogers will stick with Scales. I think he's kind of anchored with that. I I'd actually I think the mix would be better with Welsh. And I think Welsh is two-footed enough that he'd be fine on the left. Um, but I I worry because we've been talking about this. So Carter Vickers being fit enough to play is not necessarily Carter Vickers at 100%. And
No.
some of the comments about that Rogers made about squeezing the game and our center backs not being high enough. We'll be fine against St. Johnstone most likely in that regard. It's more so, if as we progress into the post split, well, the the derby prior to that, and then the post split games where some teams will have a little more, and if if Carter Vickers continues kind of carry something where he's maybe 90% or 95%, where he's just that half step slower, that would be kind of a concern for me. But yeah, I'd probably lean towards Welsh, but I don't think that's gonna I don't think that's gonna happen, and it's a lean. Like I don't think it's a clear and obvious um, uh, decision between the two. The one thing I will say on St. Johnston, so because I did kind of break it up between pre-Levine, that they were horrific before Levine came in, and I think
Mm.
that skews some of the season
Yeah, fair
data.
enough.
Right. So the one part, so they are bad on set pieces. So again, I'm not implying that Craig Levine's like the greatest manager or coach in the history of the world, but so that's emblematic of an issue for them. Because a team like them, I mean, that should be a focus, and you would think, a team in a situation that's not doing great on set pieces, that's problematic. But that's not a strength of ours anyway. So that's kind of a relative matchup. That it's like, tilts our way, but it's not something that makes me feel warm and fuzzy. Where they have actually improved under Levine is defending an open play. So they've basically moved from like horrific to mid-table. So that their actual like XG concession is better than Motherwell. It's better than Aberdeen. It's better than, um, geez, I just had it up. Let me. Um so yeah, so they are um, better than uh, yeah, all of those teams. And the ones you would expect, like Dundee and Ross County. So again, if we go back to this, Motherwell is, I think, a decent comp for them. Only skewed a little bit, meaning that Motherwell's got a little bit more in attack. They're better on
Mm.
set pieces. I think St. Johnston's probably on margin similar defensively, or maybe he's a little bit better in open play. And their keeper's been decent. That's the other thing that gets me
Yeah,
perpetually.
Mitov has been
Yeah,
very good. Yeah.
yeah, so that makes me nervous on a relative basis because Kelly's a bomb scare,
Mm.
and so I don't have anxiety over the sense that they're going to beat us 2-0 or they're 2-1. It is it's the 0-0 Craig Levine special that keeps me up at night,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Because
that's what keeps
yeah,
me nervous.
he's over his time. He's flipped between a back three, back four, 4-5-1, 3-4-1-2, 3-4-2-3-1 the last two games. So he's kind of horses for courses kind of manager. So he's going to set up not necessarily in a predictable way. It's going to be in a way that he feels can best nullify. When they got the 0-0 at Celtic Park, now he wasn't the manager, but they set up in a 4-4, basically two banks of four, and then somebody trying to link with the big lad up front who had a good game that day, Jayasami, I think it was Jayam Missy, I can't remember his. Sorry, apologies for not pronouncing it properly. So yes, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did something similar. Really had a big focal point, somebody trying to get close, and then two solid banks of four would be the way I think they'll set up. So I take your point. He's definitely improved them. Um, Probably enough that they're not going to get relegated, which is probably means he's done his job right. So fair play. And all things being equal, it should be a similar outcome to the Livingston game in terms of the actual stats of the game in terms of Celtic's dominance. But the nervousness again is that okay, so the wingers were great for 45 to 55 minutes. Will one of them play well on the weekend? Will both of them be rubbish? Will Ida, Ida played as if he was Norwich's fourth choice striker at the weekend, rather than how he had
Right.
been just really well. If he performs like that again, are we going to score, etc., etc. So my worries about all those things, I guess, more than whether Levine plays three at the back or four.
Agreed. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it, same level, just presents a different challenge that I
Mm,
think likely matches up to be more problematic for us given our relative
mm,
strengths and weaknesses. I do think it'll be fascinating. Probably one of the more interesting questions will be at the striker position, and if we do end up going with a one striker, is it Ida or is it Kyogo? And I think I might again my concern, um, on a relative basis would be that we uh, flip flop in a bass backwards way, meaning that the way, and again, you can't know how an opposition team is going to set up beforehand, so you can't predict the future. Given the way Livingston set up in the past, I'm not being critical, but it just happened that the way that Livingston set up to play probably would have benefited Kyogo from the start over Ida, given the movement and the man
mm,
marking and the space that was available. Um, whereas, I think Levine's more likely to set up in these two banks and narrow and fairly deep,
mm.
where probably that's going to suit Ida, I would think.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I think it'll be
Agree.
interesting
Yeah,
to see.
yeah.
Yeah. So, this goes back to this issue of on form and, you know, recency bias, which is obviously Kyogo looked much better. And I am of the opinion, like, somehow we got to figure out a way to play Kyogo the majority of games, because I do think he's still our best attacking player. Um, and so how do you do that? And this goes back to you try to squeeze him in the 10 role, and so that we're right back to all of these conversations that we've been having recently.
Mm.
So I think that will be interesting. Meaning that because in my mind, like the idea why Awada and Bernardo against that. So if we see the same midfield as the weekend and Kyogo up top, that's when I'll start to get nervous.
Yes. Like, that
That'll
seems
be the official
tough. I
nervous
agree.
bell
I
getting
agree.
rung.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
So let's hope not. But any final thoughts as we wrap it up
No,
here?
I think we're thought out for the week.
Okay, good. Especially after this daylight savings stuff. I emptied out what little is left in my head. Okay, well, everyone, thank you for joining us. We'll I don't know if we flirted with the idea of coming back later this week. Probably not at this point since we've talked about the St. Johnstone game, but we'll be back next week to review that game. Um, Subscribe, like, uh, uh, leave us a review if you'd like on the various platforms. That always helps us out. Enda will be back again at some point, hopefully in the near future. He'll be producing this, so hopefully we'll get this out today as he gets around to it. But thanks for carving out the time in your busy schedule there, Alan, and everyone for listening. And we'll talk to you next week.